major problem. In Iraq, 5 million cubic meters of waste are dumped daily into the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This means that Basra residents are drinking polluted water.
Aid groups have accused the government of poor management and weak governance. Experts say Iraq's environmental and public health problems stemming from waste are likely to intensify due to climate change and increasing water scarcity.
That's it for this edition of Middle East Matters. From all of us on the team, thank you very much for watching.
Faced with the Russian invasion, a spirit of resistance and unity has taken hold of Ukraine. Our reporters on the ground have been talking to civilians and soldiers, young conscripts, volunteer paramedics and doctors who operate or deliver babies underground as the bombs fall. Trapped by the war, the Ukrainian people tell stories of darkness and despair, but also of courage and hope. Watch reporters on France 24 and France24.com.
Versailles, Mont Saint-Michel, the Louvre are well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius and France harbours many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24, discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen and farmers, to Michelin star sporting chefs. Meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You are here on France 24 and France24.com.
Bienvenue à tous. Welcome to Live from Paris, world news and analysis from France 24. I'm Mark Owen. These are the headlines. A multiple shooting in New York. In the subway, it's reported explosive devices were also found. We'll be crossing live to our correspondent, Jessica Limazurier, who is there for the very latest. The gap between the candidates is shrinking even more in France. Both Macron and Le Pen are on the campaign trail again this Tuesday. And the predicted turnout for the second round of voting is also getting smaller. Allegations of use of chemical weapons in Mariupol as the West calls for an investigation. Russia denies using a poisonous substance. It raises fears over a repeat of previous alleged use of chemicals in places such as Syria. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin calls his invasion of Ukraine noble. Coming up on the France 24 debate, we'll be looking just at that, chemical weapons in Ukraine. There are calls from the US and Britain for an investigation after Ukrainian soldiers of the Azov regiment were reportedly injured by a poisonous substance during another Russian assault on the port of Mariupol. There's no evidence yet that's been gathered. The UK Foreign Secretary says it would be a callous escalation of the war. The Pentagon says it's deeply concerning. We'll have a panel of experts here to discuss this story and all its implications. That's the debate in an hour's time. First the news, live from Paris. Thank you very much for being with us. Let's bring you the breaking news from New York. 5 people shot, explosive devices found in a subway station. According to multiple law enforcement sources, is briefed on the investigation. This is the scene we're awaiting a news briefing to happen at the time. We can cross to our correspondent, Jessica Lumazure, who's at the scene. Jessica, of course, our correspondent who covers New York and the United Nations, but very much focused on this event in the subway. Jessica, what is the latest you can tell us at this stage?
Hi, Mark. Just to clarify, I pulled over my car. I'm on the way to the scene. I'm not far, but I just pulled over to go live with you. We have reports that some 13 people have been injured in this attack, which took place shortly before 8:30 a.m. at the 36th Street subway station in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. We know that at least 5 people had gunshot wounds of some sort, but we are, as you say, waiting for this press conference to have more details from the police and the local authorities on exactly what happened. A witness said that the attacker was a man who was wearing dark blue clothes and a bright orange construction vest, to the type worn by workers here in New York City, and a gas mask. And he is at large. Police are currently searching for him. That whole area is cordoned off by the emergency services. Local schools have been shut as a precaution, and the search is on for this man. We saw videos from the scene taken by witnesses and posted to social media, which showed people fleeing from that subway train. There was a sort of smoke-filled air in that subway station, and people appeared to be very panicked. And then afterwards, we could see people lying on the ground covered in blood. So really, this is an evolving situation, and we will find out more shortly.
Jessica, for now, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date with the situation. Jessica Lumazure, our correspondent in New York, will be crossing live to her and that news conference, which we are expecting to happen very shortly. We can tell you 5 people shot, explosive devices found in this incident, which of course caused a major alert in New York City. Next, the latest on the presidential election campaign here in France. France's far-right candidate Marine Le Pen apparently closing the gap with the incumbent President Emmanuel Macron ahead of the second round of the country's presidential elections. This according to a poll this Tuesday, as forecast voter turnout is seen as further declining. Both candidates then on the campaign trail, tracked of course by our reporters.
I intend to implement a new democratic practice, the referendum. This means that going forward, a presidential election alone will not determine all subsequent decisions for the following years. Is it possible to propose a measure more democratic than this? During my mandate, I intend to consult the only expert that Macron never consulted, the people. Young people don't want to work in these conditions. They don't want to work 7 days out of 7 for a salary that's inadequate.
You know as well as I do, we don't work 7 days out of 7.
We work 24 hours a day, 3 8-hour shifts. Do you know what it's like to work 3 8-hour shifts in a row?
We've put in more money. Is what I'm saying wrong? Has compensation not gone up?
We were given 183 euros, but we don't feel it.
Monsieur Macron, improve our working conditions.
You need to enable us to treat people in respectful conditions. We're not able to take them all in. We need more means.
As you can see, the 2 candidates, Le Pen, Macron, campaigning. We saw there Marine Le Pen there at what looked like a news conference. Emmanuel Macron there talking with the people. We, of course, covering this every step of the way. This report now here at France 24 by Caroline Lamboli.
It's the last stretch for Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. After results from the first round came in on Sunday, Emmanuel Macron started campaigning in earnest, going to cities and regions won over by Marine Le Pen or Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who came in third. On Saturday, Emmanuel Macron will hold a rally in Marseille, a left-wing bastion. Marine Le Pen, too, has been trying to seduce the left-wing electorate. She also stands to garner the votes of those who opted for far-right candidate Éric Zemmour. She too is traveling the country and is expected to hold a big rally on Thursday in the southern city of Avignon, where she came in third in the first round after both Mélenchon and Macron.
Emmanuel Macron needs to appeal to left-wing voters. On the right, he has basically taken all the votes he can. He can count on half the votes obtained by Valérie Pécresse, who got 5%. In 2017, he went from 24 to 66% because left-wing voters, including Mélenchon supporters, voted massively for Macron.
Left-wing candidate Mélenchon was unequivocal when he called on his supporters to vote for Emmanuel Macron. But polls suggest that a big chunk of his voters will actually go for Marine Le Pen. The candidates will face off in a live televised debate on April 20th. They're expected to spar on purchasing power, the Ukraine war, and topics such as immigration.
Caroline Lambolet with that. Let's go straight to Clovis Casali. He's with the Le Pen campaign at Vernon, near Givigny, outside Paris. Clovis, good evening to you, sir. Purchasing power, key policy issue for Le Pen. Today she's mentioned immigration.
Absolutely, you're right. During the campaign, Marine Le Pen has been going on about purchasing power, the rising cost of living that's making lives very difficult here in France for many citizens. And those social issues have been at the heart of her campaign. But today, she talked a lot about immigration. She was today outlining, if you will, her vision of democracy, how she wants to govern France, and she wants to change institutions. She wants also referendums. She wants referendums on immigration, notably. She has been repeating over the years, and she said so again today, that there was too much immigration, uncontrolled and dangerous for the country, threatening French values. And she also said that she wanted to ban the Islamic hijab in public areas, as she thinks it's a sign of an ideology, an Islamist ideology that's dangerous for France, and she wants that to stop. So she's coming very much back to the fundamentals of the national rally, the national front, years and years of campaigning on those issues, and it's back now in the spotlight just days before the second round of the presidential election.
Clovis, for now, thank you very much indeed. Clovis Casali there with the Marine Le Pen Rassemblement National campaign, and we'll be getting the aspect from the Macron side of things in roughly 30 minutes' time to give both sides, of course, of the campaign, as we do here at France 24. Let's move on to the other big story of the day, of course, Ukraine, people fleeing the eastern areas ahead of the anticipated Russian offensive. Kiev is checking, though, reports that Russian forces use chemical weapons in the besieged port of Mariupol. Soldiers of the Azov regiment reported injury by poisonous substance. Mariupol is already mostly destroyed by a Russian siege and bombardment that began late February. The death toll there is predicted to be over 20,000, according to the regional governor. Ukrainian Marines are reportedly holed up in an industrial district. Robert Parsons is our chief foreign editor. He's in Kyiv.
What we're being told from the Ukrainian forces inside Mariupol, from the Azov regiment, which is one of the Ukrainian units fighting there, is that a drone flew over their positions and dropped chemical weapons on them. There is absolutely no way of verifying the information, since there's no way of getting into Mariupol at the moment. It's completely blockaded by the Russians and has been for at least the last 2 to 3 weeks. But that's the information we're getting from within the city. In addition to that, President Zelensky has been saying that certain Russian propaganda outlets have been suggesting that the Russians might use chemical weapons inside Ukraine, not just in Mariupol, but more generally. Absolutely no way of verifying this either at the moment, but there is a lot of information flowing around, a lot of it false, a lot of it designed to confuse and to scare, and at this stage you can't really say very much more than that about it.
Robert Parsons, our chief foreign editor there in Kyiv. We, of course, will be discussing all the implications of what's happening in Ukraine in our debate. We're examining the issue of chemical weapons usage with a special panel here in the studio. Well, the United Nations is signaling concern over the plight of women and children in the war in Ukraine. There have been numerous reports of rape of Ukrainian women and children by Russian soldiers. Here at France 24, Sinead McCausland with this.
This is Anna. She lives in a quiet neighborhood 75 kilometers west of Kyiv. On March 7th, she says Russian soldiers raped her. Her name has been changed and her face blurred to protect her identity.
Том 1, Кадировець, це не мій дом, мій слідуючий дом. Зайшов до нас у хату, ми зустріли його з чоловіком. Він взяв мене типу в полон.
Anna says her attacker was a Chechen soldier. 4 Russian troops entered while he was raping her. They took him away. When troops left her house, Anna found Viagra.
Сподіваюся, що це не кам'яний вік, що це 21 вік, то говорити не можна, ні? Щоб це отако лізли, непонятно куди, непонятно хто.
Just down the road from Anna, her neighbor said the same Chechen soldier raped another woman. Inside the house, this note was left on a mirror, written with lipstick. It reads, "Tortured by unknown people, buried by Russian soldiers." Anna's story is one of many that are being reported following Russia's retreat from areas around Kyiv. Ukraine's Ombudsman for Human Rights and the president of human rights organization La Strada say they've documented several cases of rape. La Strada's president called on the UN to investigate the war crimes.
And we want you to hear our voices that violence and rape is used now as a weapon of war by Russian invaders in Ukraine.
The priority for now is to provide survivors with support. The director of the UN Women's Agency has called for an independent investigation into all allegations of rape and sexual violence.
Let's go straight back to New York, where there's a briefing regarding the shooting situation.
We are working with our federal partners, where we are asking for the public's help. Anyone with information, videos, or photographs, no matter how insignificant they think it may be, is encouraged to call Crime Stoppers at 800-577-TIPS. All calls are strictly confidential. I'd like to turn it over to the FDNY to give information about the victims. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. The governor would like to speak now. Governor Hope, my apologies.
Sorry. Good afternoon. This morning, ordinary New Yorkers woke up in anticipation of a relatively normal day. They left their homes en route to school, en route to their jobs, and to a normal day, as I mentioned. That sense of tranquility and normalness was disrupted, brutally disrupted, by an individual so cold-hearted and depraved of heart that they had no caring about the individuals that they assaulted as they simply went about their daily lives. This individual is still on the loose. This person is dangerous. They're asking individuals to be very vigilant and alert. And you'll get more reports on specificity as the day goes on. So this is an active shooter situation right now in the city of New York. I just got off the phone with the mayor. He's recovering well. He is monitoring. He's actively engaged in the situation. I wanted to let him know that the people of the entire state of New York stand with the people of this city, this community, and we say no more. No more mass shootings. No more disrupting lives. No more creating heartbreak for people just trying to live their lives as normal New Yorkers. It has to end, and it ends now. And we are sick and tired of reading headlines about crime, whether they're mass shootings or the loss of a teenage girl or a 13-year-old. It has to stop. I'm committing the full resources of our state to fight this surge of crime, this insanity that is seizing our city, because we want to get back to normal. It has been a long, hard 2 years. That's what we crave, that sense of stability and normalcy. And this is what the mayor and I are going to continue to work toward. And I thank the partners, the brave people of the MTA, the first ones who had the sense, the drivers of the train, to leave the station to make sure no more victims could be hurt. The NYPD, FDNY, state police, everyone involved in this has one purpose, and is to stop the insanity of these crimes. You'll hear now from our fire department. I want to thank them for being there to help us diffuse a volatile situation. But we'll be giving continued reports as this day unfolds. Again, we ask everyone to be careful, be cautious, report what you see. It is likely that someone out there listening to this is going to help us lead us to that individual. You have a description of what they're wearing. You know the details, but this is the day. We pull together as New Yorkers, united in a common purpose to say no more. And that is what I'm going to continue to do as the governor of the state of New York, working with our local partners right here. Thank you.
Governor. Good afternoon. This morning, the FDNY received reports of gunshot victims in the subway. Thanks to their quick response, we were able to treat 16 patients. 10 of those patients are suffering from gunshot wounds at this time, and 5 of them are in critical but stable condition in our local hospitals.
Can you say that again?
Yes, we have 16 total patients. 10 of them are suffering from gunshot wounds, and 5 of them are in critical but stable condition at this time. And I'm going to pass it over to the MTA for an update on our subways.
Okay. First of all, we have to thank the NYPD and the FDNY and the whole team who've done so much to protect us and help immediately to recover from this situation. And I also need to acknowledge the MTA workers who had the foresight to immediately move a train that was on the platform, the R train, out of the station so it could carry people to safety.
The media briefing happening there in New York. We can tell you that 5 people are critical but stable after the shooting in the subway in Brooklyn. We've heard from the governor of the state of New York, Kathy Hochul, saying it has to stop. The insanity that seized in the city, she says, no more. She urges people to be careful, to repeat what they see, to report what they see, rather, and a description has been given of the man who is currently on the loose, leaving the scene dressed in blue with a fluorescent type of gilet that he was wearing, and also it reports that he was wearing a sort of gas mask as well. So that's the current situation. 5 people seriously injured but stable with shooting injuries from that incident. We'll bring you more, of course, as we get it. Let's now return to the situation in Ukraine, where, of course, we've heard people fleeing the east ahead of a possible Russian offensive. We've got allegations of the use of chemical weapons in Mariupol as well, and a suggestion by one of the Russian separatists that those Ukrainian Marines apparently holed up in an industrial unit in Mariupol should basically be treated with, or rather approached with, chemical soldiers was the expression they used, basically implying that they should have chemical weapons thrown into those places to kind of smoke them out. In fact, the reality might be it would probably kill them. Let's bring in for some analysis of the situation our first guest this evening to tell us more about the situation. Michael Cox is from the London School of Economics. Good evening to you, sir. The director of the LSE Ideas and also Emeritus Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics. Great to see you, and thanks for joining us here.
No problem.
24. This issue of chemical weapons, clearly, I don't like to use this phrase, but I'm going to. It's very much a game changer, isn't it, about what could happen next?
Well, it's another game changer. It's another red line which could be, might be, and maybe already has been crossed. The only question is how many red lines have been crossed so far. But clearly, if it is proven, and the Russians won't accept it, of course, if it is, however, proven, this really goes against one of the great conventions banning the use of chemical and biological weapons in fields of battle and under any circumstance. What will therefore happen afterwards? We'll have to wait and see.
It's one of those questions, isn't it? Vladimir Putin apparently describing this invasion he launched on February the 24th, that is ongoing, as noble. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I heard that point today. It's a very interesting use of the word noble. I don't see it as noble. I can't think that many ordinary Russians see this as noble, whatever they believe. I mean, this is an invasion by one country of another sovereign democratic country, using very brutal means, the sort of brutal means we saw used in Grozny some time back, which we saw used in Syria. And it's very worrying to think that the commander now being put in charge of the Russian forces now to go into Donetsk and Lugansk was actually the commander in Syria as well. So hold your breath. I don't think it's going to be nice.
What's happening in Mariupol? Do you see any echoes in what happened at, for instance, Aleppo?
We can always draw parallels. I think we've got to look specifically. But a friend of mine said to me, and he knows these things better than I do, Mark, he said, there's a Russian way of warfare now. It's not subtle, but it can be brutal and it can be effective. You pound a city, you terrify the citizens therein, and hope, therefore, this brings enormous pressure to bear upon the government, in this case, the Ukrainian government. And at some point, they think the Ukrainian government will break because the pressure on the civilian population is going to be so extreme that this will then force Zelensky to the negotiating table. I assume that is what the end game is for Putin.
10,000 people dead in Mariupol, we think.
We think.
We think.
Yeah.
Possibly that figure could be double.
We just don't know. I mean, at the moment, I think got to be very, very careful with all the figures we're using. I'm sure you are too. I know the BBC is and France 24 is, but it's so important to be careful with these figures. You see the high figures, the low figures. I think we just have to wait until independent people go in there and make proper verification on all the killings, whether in Buchal or whether in Mariupol. All we can say is that given the scale of the destruction, given the scale of the attacks on civilian residences, high apartments, the numbers must be fairly high by any stretch of the imagination.
And the next stage of this assault, as we are led to believe, but what we're seeing is people leaving the east, is a full-on attack to recapture what remains of what Vladimir Putin sees as Russian territory, that Donbass region.
Yeah.
This clearly is going to be more mayhem, more destruction, more death.
This is, in some sense, I'm not sure it's going to be the last phase of the war, but it's a very important phase of the war. We, however, do have to put it into a context, Mark. The first phase of the war effectively failed. Kiev wasn't captured. A number of cities have not been captured, even when they've been bombarded, like Kharkiv. This has therefore forced Russia into a different mode to actually claim victory by victory over the Ukrainian army by recapturing Donetsk and Luhansk. On the other hand, there's a very large, well-equipped, well-trained Ukrainian army there to resist. So I think it's going to be a very, very long and bitter struggle.
Michael Cox of the London School of Economics, thank you so very much for sharing your knowledge, information, analysis with us, which we value very greatly. Thank you for coming to us.
Nice to be here. Thanks again, Mark.
Great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. We're, of course, watching all developments in Ukraine. Our debate is focusing on that issue of chemical weapons. That's coming up at 7:10 Paris time. For now, Pakistan, the new government facing a daunting task of managing a stuttering economy with huge deficits. An aide to the new Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, was saying this on Tuesday. Sharif, 70 years old, younger brother of the former Premier Nawaz Sharif, was elected as Prime Minister on Monday following a week-long constitutional crisis after Parliament ousted Imran Khan. He, of course, the former famous Pakistani cricketer, in a no-confidence vote. However, there's been anger on the streets since Khan was forced out of power. Let's get the analysis and bring in Mariam Mufti, who's Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo in Canada. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm wondering, to give you a broad question to start with, what's your take on the current situation in Pakistan?
Well, the current situation is quite unstable and chaotic. Yes, Shehbaz Sharif has been elected as Prime Minister, and yes, Imran Khan has been ousted in a vote of no confidence. But what that means is that PTI supporters all over the country are protesting this no confidence motion, claiming it to be illegitimate. And then Shehbaz Sharif as Prime Minister now faces a major economic crisis in the country and a lot of political turmoil. And I'm not sure that as the leader of a very unstable coalition, that Shehbaz Sharif is going to have an easy time of it.
Mariam, can you explain to us who Imran Khan offended for this no-confidence vote to be brought about? What did he do wrong?
Well, I would say that there's three major factors that brought about this no-confidence vote. The first one being that the military, which is largely believed to have supported Imran Khan's victory back in 2018, had stopped supporting him. Primarily because Imran Khan had started to threaten the institutional interests of the military and was interfering in high-level military appointments. And in last fall, particularly the appointment of the director of the intelligence services in Pakistan certainly brought about the displeasure of the Pakistan Army. The fact that the Pakistan Army currently is also quite displeased with Imran Khan's so-called independent foreign policy, whereby Imran Khan chose to remain neutral in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, whereas the Pakistan Army is condemning this particular invasion, I think is a problem. And then certainly the Pakistan Army is not happy that Imran Khan was alienating Western allies such as the United States by continuing down this path of an independent foreign policy. The second factor, I would say, is misgovernance, particularly in the largest province of Pakistan, Punjab, where Imran Khan had put in place a chief minister who was largely seen to be a puppet and somewhat ineffective. That has brought about a political crisis in this very, very important province. It is home to about 56.4% of Pakistan's population. I think that was a second factor. And the third factor, I would say, is that Imran Khan relied on electable politicians who have their own independent sources of power. And these politicians were not necessarily loyal to Imran Khan. And certainly, Imran Khan could not count on credible commitment from these electable politicians when the no confidence motion came about. Many of his coalition partners, the MQM and the PMLQ, were threatening to leave Imran Khan prior to the no confidence motion. Many PTI members had also decided to withdraw the support from him. And so Imran Khan was actually in a very, very tight corner.
One might say perhaps a sticky wicket, to use a cricketing analogy there, given he's a former cricketing star. Mariam, we need to leave it there. I'm sorry. Thank you very much indeed, Mariam Mufti, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo in Canada. Thank you for that analysis. The news continues after a very short break here, live from Paris.
For nearly half a century, Cyprus has been cut in two. In the north, the Turkish Cypriot government, and in the south, the Republic of Cyprus, Greek-speaking and Christian. Varosha, a former seaside resort and a symbol of the island's division, became a ghost town when it was abandoned by its inhabitants following the Turkish invasion in 1974. In 2019, Turkey reopened Varosha to tourists and to former residents. Long deprived of their right to return, they are now demanding the return of their property.
C'est moi qui me bats pour l'instant, mais je sais pas combien d'années je peux encore me battre.
Watch Varosha Revisited on France 24 and France24.com. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Welcome back. You're watching Live from Paris. I'm Marco, and these are the headlines. Allegations of use of chemical weapons in Mariupol. As the West calls for an investigation, Russia denies using a poisonous substance. It's raising fears over a repeat of previous alleged use of chemicals in places like Syria. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has called his invasion of Ukraine noble. Doug Herbert joins us for the analysis. The gap between the candidates is shrinking even more in France. Both candidates, Macron and Le Pen, on the campaign trail again this Tuesday. And the predicted turnout is also getting smaller for April the 24th. A multiple shooting in New York in the subway. It's reported explosive devices were also found. A manhunt is underway. Thank you for joining us. The breaking news in New York. 5 people have been shot. They are in a serious but stable condition in hospital, according to the authorities in New York. Explosive devices also found in a subway station. Now, according to multiple law enforcement sources briefed on this investigation, preliminary information indicates a suspect fleeing, wearing a construction vest and something resembling a gas mask. The incident occurred during the morning commute at 36th Street subway station in Brooklyn's Sunset Park neighborhood. 13 people are reported to have been injured. The details of those injuries not yet made public. Jessica Lemazurier is following the story in New York.
We have reports that some 13 people have been injured in this attack, which took place shortly before 8:30 a.m. at the 36th Street subway station in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. We know that at least 5 people had gunshot wounds of some sort, but we are, as you say, waiting for this press conference to have more details from the police and the local authorities on exactly what happened. A witness said that the attacker was a man who was wearing dark blue clothes and a bright orange construction vest, to the type worn by workers here in New York City, and a gas mask. And he is at large. Police are currently searching for him. That whole area is cordoned off by the emergency services. Local schools have been shut as a precaution, and the search is on for this man. We saw videos from the scene taken by witnesses and posted to social media, which showed people fleeing from that subway train. There was a sort of smoke-filled air in that subway station, and people appeared to be very panicked. And then afterwards, we could see people lying on the ground covered in blood. So really, this is an evolving situation, and we will find out more shortly.
Jessica Lemazurier, our correspondent there in New York. As we say, a manhunt is continuing in the city and around the state, and of course we'll bring you more on that as it happens. People now fleeing areas of eastern Ukraine ahead of an anticipated Russian offensive. This as Kiev said it was checking reports that Russian forces had used chemical weapons in the besieged port of Mariupol. Soldiers of the Azov regiment reported injury by a poisonous substance. Mariupol's already mostly destroyed by the Russian siege and bombardment. Since late February, the death toll is predicted to be over 20,000, according to the regional governor. Ukrainian Marines are reportedly holed up in an industrial district.
It's the last stand for Mariupol. After over 40 days of siege, the destroyed port city is in a decisive phase. It could fall to Russia at any moment. A Ukrainian presidential advisor said Ukrainian forces had been closed in on.
The city where death came under the Russian flag. Tens of thousands dead. 90% of houses destroyed. Ukrainian soldiers are surrounded and blocked.
Moscow's troops suffocate the city and have advanced into the center. What's left is the industrial district Yazovstal, where Ukrainian soldiers are holed up. It's the only area they remain in control of. Russian President Vladimir Putin said in a press conference with his Belarusian counterpart that the invasion was inevitable.
What's happening in Ukraine is a tragedy. But Alexander Lukashenko said it right. There was no other choice. It was only a matter of time.
Putin's defiant remarks come as the Azov Battalion, a volunteer military unit, said Russian forces dropped a chemical agent onto the Yazovstal steel plant. In a telegram post, they claimed citizens had fallen ill, but that there were no serious injuries. An advisor to Mariupol's government confirmed something was dropped in the area. Moscow denies the claims despite a pro-Russian separatist spokesperson previously suggesting they may be up for use. The United States, the United Kingdom and Australia are investigating the unverified information. If confirmed, it would be the first known use of chemical weapons by Russia during its invasion of Ukraine.
The images really tell the story about the scale of destruction there in Mariupol. Sinead McCausland, our reporter, with that story. Douglas Herbert has joined us for the analysis. Doug, you pointed out during that report, I mentioned soldiers in an industrial unit. You said it's probably a former industrial unit. Given the scale of what's going on there, it's huge. Vladimir Putin describing the whole war as noble.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin, everything points to the fact that he is more and more reality-proof. There is no amount of cajoling, reasoning, persuasion. A parade of world leaders have gone to him, literally almost groveling for him to try to have an iota of understanding of the realities, trying to give him factual presentations of what's going on. The latest one being the Austrian Chancellor yesterday on Monday, going there and coming away from that meeting saying he is pessimistic as ever about the prospects for peace, because he doesn't believe Russia or Putin specifically is acting in good faith, said that Putin has basically continues to dismiss the mounting evidence of brutality and atrocities in Ukraine as staged fakes, and sees really the only road ahead right now from the Kremlin standpoint, from Putin's standpoint, as an intensification of the brutality that we have already seen. More of the same, echoing what we heard the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba say last week. Basically, worse is yet to come, and this is going to sadly remind everyone of the worst of World War II. Look, what do we have? We have right now rising allegations, UN-backed allegations of rape of women in Ukraine by Russian forces. We have allegations being investigated, still allegations, of the use of chemical weapons, which would be in line with Russia's track record in the past in Syria and elsewhere, or Russia and its proxies using chemical weapons. That's being investigated. We have the atrocities, which continue to be discovered day after day after day. And we have what you said, that line from Putin, a noble war. Sure, he said it's a tragedy what's happened. What he left out of that is that it's a tragedy of his own making. This is an unprovoked war that he himself planned and started. He laid out the blueprint for it. And what he said this Tuesday when he was meeting with his ally Alexander Lukashenko, they were at the Eastern Cosmodrome. It's the 61st anniversary of the first Soviet man in space. Basically, he said the war is, he has no doubt, Putin said, the war is going to be absolutely successful. He didn't call it war. He called it special military operation, of course. He said it's going to achieve all its aims. He denied that his forces had suffered any setback north of Kiev, that they were pushed back or withdrew. That's all the fruit of Western propaganda. He said that we are going to fulfill all of our military plans rhythmically and calmly. This is a man who is imbued in the aspic of his own conviction, and he's like no one seems to be able to break through the carapace, if you will, of his own denial. And you could go as far as calling it delusion at this point. No one can get through to him. He is determined as ever, more determined than he was perhaps even at the start of the invasion, because now he's facing what he sees as Western propagandistic accusations of atrocities, his forces having been defeated. You can't tell Putin he's been defeated, his forces have committed atrocities. You can't do that. He is angry, he is defiant, he is determined, and he is preparing for worse to come, as the Ukrainian foreign minister put it.
Doug, we need to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Douglas Herbert with his take on the situation in Ukraine, and of course that line from Vladimir Putin that the whole bloody offensive is the word that Putin used, noble. We stay with Ukraine, though. 4.7 million people have fled since the Russians launched their invasion on February the 24th. A large number of the refugees are children. In Moldova, the United Nations is working to provide education for those children. There are thousands among the refugees fleeing Ukraine. We're joined now by Yasmin Sharif, who's director of the organisation Education Cannot Wait, joining us from Moldova Live. Yasmin, thanks very much for being with us. I'm wondering two things, really. How do you cope with the trauma you're witnessing, and how do you help the children cope with theirs?
Well, first of all, this morning I'm here on a high-level mission. Education Cannot Wait with our colleagues in the UK and US traveling together, and we met with the refugees this morning. Amongst them was a mother who had fled with her two daughters, and we saw the tears in her eyes as she broke down crying how she had fled from Odessa. So human suffering is right before us, and we see it. How do we cope with it? We cope by challenging and defying the violations committed against her and millions, so that we at least can provide a safe haven in a country like Moldova through education and psychosocial services.
And in terms of education, I can see there are a number of levels that this might work. Obviously, it's giving children a chance to learn, but at the same time, it's giving you a chance to keep an eye on their health and their welfare.
Absolutely, and we met with refugee children. You can see that they are severely traumatized. They fled with one parent. Some are even unaccompanied minors who fled without a parent or with relatives. Many have left family members behind, such as grandparents, and obviously husbands and men in fighting age. They are traumatized. I saw children in classrooms today. You could see that they are nervous, they're distressed as a result of having to flee Ukraine under missiles and sirens and the imminent threat of not surviving.
Can you put a number on the number of children that you are actually helping? Because I imagine this is changing as the days go by, because refugees are arriving all the time, aren't they?
Absolutely, and in Moldova, since the war broke out, over 400,000 refugees have arrived, and most of them have passed through Moldova to continue on to other European countries that are part of the European Union. Moldova is not part of the European Union. It's the poorest country in Europe, and today there are 50,000 children in school age in Moldova who are refugee children, and of whom only 1,600 children have actually integrated into the public system. So we are speaking about the predominant majority of children still yet to go to school. Having said that, I want to stress that the government of Moldova have maintained an open door policy to all refugee children and their families coming in, and they are working with very little resources trying to integrate children to the public schools. But they have to find them, because many are in host families. 80% are staying with host families. They're not registered, and the government is trying to find them so that they can place them in public schools. Because Moldova has never dealt with an emergency of this kind before. So it's important that the international community is there to support a country like Moldova.
Completely hear what you're saying. And just to reiterate that for our viewers, wherever they are, Moldova, the poorest country in Europe, facing this overwhelming number of refugees coming in. And of course, it's already, I imagine, a school system that's probably full. You've got to then find places to put these extra children into schools.
I lost you here, but I can imagine
or even
your
set up
question.
Okay. If you're hearing me, Yasmin, can I ask you about the kind of dangers these children have been facing? Because we've been reporting on issues such as people trafficking and those kind of possible abuses that are going on. These children are very vulnerable. Have you seen any evidence of children having suffered that, of families having suffered from these things?
Yeah, let me first go back to your first question as we got interrupted, because I think it's an important question to raise also for public awareness. The school system in Moldova was already not in full capacity because it is the poorest country in Europe, and therefore now this adds an additional burden to a system that has long not been able to function to its optimal level. So it's just an additional burden. The children we have met are young in primary and early secondary. What we have learned from them and their mothers primarily is that they have fled the violence, they have fled from missiles and bombings. We have not met anyone yet that has been subjected to trafficking. However, I can say, and I have worked in many conflicts and armed conflicts over the years, including in the war in the Balkans many years ago, and trafficking and sexual violence and gender-based violence is a means of warfare. And these are, of course, crimes against international humanitarian law and human rights law. And we worry that more and more girls will be caught in that unless they find refuge in surrounding countries and are protected. Protection is critically important, and we have good UN agencies and international non-governmental organizations on the ground, such as UNICEF, UNHCR, working closely with the government to ensure safe places and protection so that they don't get drawn into the trafficking to additional sexual violence and gender-based violence, because even when you're a refugee on the move, you're at risk. So it's both within Ukraine and as you are a refugee on the move. So international organizations and local organizations and government that host refugees are working hand in hand to try to mitigate this impact.
Yasmin Sharif of Education Cannot Wait, director of that organization, joining us from Moldova. Excuse me. Thank you very much for your time, and good luck with the continuation of your essential project there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much to you. Thank you.
Let's bring you the latest now on the presidential election campaign here in France. France's far-right candidate, Marine Le Pen, closing the gap, it seems, with the incumbent President Emmanuel Macron ahead of the second round of the country's presidential elections. This according to a poll published this Tuesday. It's also forecast that voter turnout is going to further decline by April the 24th, which is the date of the second round vote. Both candidates are on the campaign trail, as you'd expect, and yes, they are tracked by our reporters. Here at France 24, Caroline Lambolet has this.
It's the last stretch for Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. After results from the first round came in on Sunday, Emmanuel Macron started campaigning in earnest, going to cities and regions won over by Marine Le Pen or Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who came in third. On Saturday, Emmanuel Macron will hold a rally in Marseille, a left-wing bastion. Marine Le Pen, too, has been trying to seduce the left-wing electorate. She also stands to garner the votes of those who opted for far-right candidate Éric Zemmour. She, too, is traveling the country and is expected to hold a big rally on Thursday in the southern city of Avignon, where she came in third in the first round after both Mélenchon and Macron.
Emmanuel Macron needs to appeal to left-wing voters. On the right, he has basically taken all the votes he can. He can count on half the votes obtained by Valérie Pécresse, who got 5%. In 2017, he went from 24 to 66% because left-wing voters, including Mélenchon supporters, voted massively for Macron.
Left-wing candidate Mélenchon was unequivocal when he called on his supporters to vote for Emmanuel Macron. But polls suggest that a big chunk of his voters will actually go for Marine Le Pen. The candidates will face off in a live televised debate on April 20th. They're expected to spar on purchasing power, the Ukraine war, and topics such as immigration.
April the 20th, the big head-to-head debate between the two, and of course the second round vote, April the 24th. And what we will do is bring you every development, every step of the way in equal reporting time, of course, which is the minimum requirement here in France. Time for business. Kate Moody joins us. Inflation's hit a fresh 40-year high in the US of A.
Yeah, the headline figure, Mark, is the highest since December of 1981. It's going to put more pressure on the U.S. Federal Reserve to get more aggressive in raising interest rates at its meetings in May and June. Consumer prices were on average 8.5% higher this March than they were at the same time 1 year ago. It is the first round of data from the U.S. to reflect the real impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the disruptions to supply chains and energy supplies in particular. The White House putting pressure firmly on the war, warning on Monday that inflation would be extraordinarily high because of what it described as Putin's price hike. Now, if we break down the numbers, inflation was fueled by a 32% jump in the price of energy, with gasoline prices up 48%. Food prices rose 8.8%, while used cars were about 35% more expensive. If you strip out the volatile food and energy prices, the core inflation also hit a 40-year high of 6.5%. However, those monthly paces of price increases did show signs of moderating, in particular that 0.3% rise in core inflation compared to February. That was much lower than expected, and some analysts say the inflation peak may now have been reached. Well, that will be little immediate consolation for American households. Wages were about 5.6% higher than they were a year ago, but average hourly earnings still declined, not keeping pace with that rising cost of living. And with the huge jumping cost for basics like food and gasoline, many consumers say they're struggling.
You know, gas prices are up, obviously, everyone knows that. So that's an extra $1 per gallon that I'm paying to get into the city to work. And then, we have the tolls that just went up this past year, $1. My eggs are $1 more as well. So everything's going up at least $1, which, adds up, of course, especially when, you have kids and got to get groceries.
Milk and bread is very expensive nowadays.
you know. So if you're thinking you're trying to budget, you know, it gets pretty hard.
Well, the rising cost of living is a problem for much of Europe as well, largely driven again by those soaring energy costs. Just for comparison, the Eurozone saw record high inflation of 7.5% in March. Spain coming in at nearly 10%, Germany over 7%. France with a relatively low 5.1% on that EU scale. The UK is set to publish data for March on Wednesday, but inflation is forecast to climb closer to 6.7%. That would be the highest in 30 years. Well, let's see how the markets are reacting. Investors seem to be focusing on the positive in the U.S., that prospect that we have hit the peak. We can see Wall Street trending higher, and the yield or return on the 10-year Treasury bond has retreated from a 3-year high earlier. The major European indices closed in the red. We saw losses of about 0.5 percentage point each in London and Frankfurt. Frankfurt actually down by 0.48% this hour. Shares of Germany's biggest lenders, Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank, dropping 9.5% and 8.5% respectively. Emmanuel Macron may be watering down his efforts to reform France's pension system. With less than 2 weeks until the second round of the presidential election, he told prospective voters that he might be flexible about raising the retirement age to 65, and he even opened the door to a possible referendum on the issue. That would be a first for the incumbent, whose efforts to overhaul the retirement system ground to a halt amid protests and the pandemic. But his rival, Marine Le Pen, has accused him of pandering. She insists that her own reforms would be better for French pensioners. Take a listen to the two candidates earlier today.
I'm listening, like you. I can't say I'm reaching out on Sunday evening and then say I don't want to change anything. The horizon of 65 years as the legal age in 2031 can be completely adapted. We can imagine review clauses.
The French are very smart. Everyone knows this is a ruse by Emmanuel Macron to try and win over left-wing voters. The reality is he will push for retirement at 65. It's his obsession.
And Le Pen has suggested lowering the minimum official retirement age to 60 for those who entered the workplace at a young age. From then, it would be on a sliding scale, according to her proposals. Both candidates have now said that they would link monthly pension payments to the rate of inflation. The cost of living emerging, of course, Mark, as the #1 issue for French voters in that first round. Little is likely to change in the next 2 weeks.
So retiring possibly 65, 64. For me, I've got 4 kids. I'll be working till I'm 90. There you go. That's my little joke. Kate Moody with the business. Great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Let's cross the studio where James Vassner's waiting with the sporting news. Champions League, of course, not far from his thoughts, I can tell, because I'm a mind reader. But first off, a world #1 returning to the tennis court.
Absolutely. Well, Novak Djokovic hadn't played for a month and a half, but you could definitely see that this afternoon. It was anything but easy as he faced Spain's Alejandro Davidovich Fokina. The Serb just about managing to stay in the game after winning the tiebreak in the second set, but it was downhill for him from there on. The Spaniard wasn't going to let a second match point slip away from him to move into the round of 16. 6-3, 7-6, 6-1. Djokovic has been playing very little tennis recently, as mentioned, because of his refusal to get vaccinated against COVID-19. The Australian Open, Indian Wells and the Miami Open all refusing to grant him entry. Well, it hasn't been a great day, though, for the French at Monte Carlo. They've all been knocked out of the tournament in very early fashion. Dan Evans beat Benjamin Bonzi in a solid 2-set win. 6-love and then 7-4 in the tiebreak to knock out the Frenchman and make his way through for a place in the round of 16. And meanwhile, Benoit Paire was ousted in the decider by Lorenzo Musetti after rallying back in the second set, winning the tiebreak. A frustrated Benoit Paire crumbled in the third, meaning that Musetti will then face Canada's Félix Auger-Aliassime in the next round. Final score 6-2, 6-7, 6-2. Hugo Humbert was also sent home by Pedro Martinez. The French hoping to perform better at their home open. That'll be next month for Roland Garros, of course. Well, as mentioned, a big football night ahead of us. In 2 hours' time, Chelsea will kick off against Real Madrid in the return leg of the Champions League quarter-finals. Now, the Blues are in the Spanish capital with a 2-goal deficit, thrashed 3-1 at home last week as Karim Benzema scored a hat-trick for the Spanish Giants. Climbing back from this is going to be a challenge, but with no away goal advantage this time round, while Thomas Tuchel's side may be able to push for extra time.
It is one of the biggest challenges to perform as a away team in Bernabeu. It is even more difficult if you have to earn a certain result, if you need to win with a minimum of 2 goals, or better even, or maybe even a 3-goal difference. That makes it almost impossible and very, very difficult. But it's worth trying.
The season showing that we have 2 forwards who've been shining, Vinicius and Benzema. In the past, Karim, Cristiano or Gareth Bale scored many goals. To say that we are now dependent on Benzema is true. There's no reason to hide it. I'm happy about it. I'm very happy to depend on Karim Benzema.
Well, elsewhere, Bayern Munich also hoping they can turn the table. Confidence that they can beat Villarreal tonight. So those games coming up in 2 hours' time, Mark.
Great night ahead. James, thank you very much indeed. Kate, thanks to you for the business too. And thanks to you all for watching. Stay with us. More news to come, and also the France 24 debate. We're examining the issue of chemical weapons in Ukraine. Allegations they've been used in Mariupol. What does this mean? Is this a red line that NATO really cannot allow to be crossed? That's the France 24 debate coming up very shortly. Stay with us for that.
Bienvenidos a las noticias de France 24.
Thanks very much for joining us. أهلا بكم في ثقافة في عدد اليوم. Ravi de vous retrouver pour Afrique Hebdo. Au programme cette semaine. نسمع بين حين والآخر. This storm has hit New York City a lot.
To be a president. 3, 2, 1.
Madagascar fait face à une seconde vague meurtrière.
Almost 99 million of you watch us every week. So thank you.
شكرا.
Gracias. Your confidence means a lot to us.
Muchas gracias.
شكرا على هذه الثقة.
Thank you. Merci du fond de mon cœur.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.